I'm delighted to be joined by the one, the only, Sir John Curtice, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. Lovely to see you.
Good afternoon, Gloria.
John, the Lib Dems finished third in 2019, behind Labour. How have they managed to position themselves as favourites?
Frankly, it is quite remarkable. They've done it off the back of some relatively good results in the local elections in the constituency back in May. But one would have to say this doesn't look like a ripe Lib Dem prospect, at least at normal times. They need a swing of 26.4% from the Conservatives to win this constituency. Only twice before have they done better than that. Once was in Christchurch, the other time was in Newbury. This is back in the days when John Major was suffering calamitous poll ratings. But in both those cases, the Liberal Democrats were starting from second place. The one closest analogy I can cite you is that the swing required in this constituency of 26.4% is exactly the swing that the then Liberal Party secured in Orpington in 1962, again from third place, allowing Eric Lubbock to win what became a very, very famous by-election victory, because it was really the first significant electoral success for the then Liberal Party since they went to near extinction immediately after the Second World War. But then we also then have to remember, Orpington at the end was at least suburban London. It was the kind of place where perhaps the Liberals might, in good circumstances, to do well. North Shropshire is a constituency which voted nearly 60% leave in the EU referendum. And you look at the polling numbers, Liberal Democrats across the country as a whole, and virtually everybody these days who says they're going to vote for Liberal Democrats said they voted Remain back in 2016. And this is also a very different constituency from Chesham and Amersham. Chesham and Amersham, Liberal Democrats always looked like a good prospect. Starting from second, a constituency that voted Remain. Here, a constituency where they came third, and where there's a predominantly Leave vote. This doesn't look like ripe Liberal Democrat territory at all.
Did Labour miss a trick, stroke, have a tactical mistake by not positioning themselves as the only party who could beat the Tories, given that they came second in the last election?
Well, yes, they did come second. Now, to be honest, it's even a pretty tough nut for the Labour Party to crack. They need just over a 20% swing. It's only 3 times in by-elections that Labour have managed to do better than that. And that again takes us back to the John Major government of 92 to 97. And, this is a constituency that the Tories were able to hang on to back in 1997, Labour's annus mirabilis. But certainly, they kind of, rumour has it, and I'm not in a position to say whether this is true or not. Rumour has it that the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats did a bit of a deal, and the Liberal Democrats were not going to fight very hard in Old Bexley because they thought perhaps Labour might have a chance of picking that up. And in return, however, the Liberal Democrats were going to be given a relatively clear run in North Shropshire. And certainly, just hearing to Lucy Powell in your previous interview, yes, she was saying, of course, the Labour Party is fighting for every vote. But Labour spokesmen are not exactly suggesting that they're going to do particularly well in this by-election. And that at least seems to imply that perhaps there's some truth to this claim. And, who knows in the end as to whether or not this is going to prove to be the right tactic at all. I think we can certainly anticipate, given the current circumstances, but, the Conservative vote in the polls now is about 13 points adrift, 12, 13 points adrift of where the party stood in the 2019 general election. So we could easily get, anything up to a 20-point drop in the Conservative vote, a much bigger drop than the 13-point in Old Bexley. But normally one would say, look, in the end, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats won't manage to coordinate sufficiently. The opposition vote will be fragmented and therefore the Conservatives would hang on to the seat. The question is whether or not there are enough Labour voters out there who are going to be willing to switch to the Democrats in a seat in which, with only one election in the last half dozen or so, that the Democrats even just narrowly managed to scrape second place.
Let's look at the wider state of the parties. Boris Johnson has become the first Tory leader to trail on the question who would make the best Prime Minister rating since 2008. Keir Starmer now in the lead for that. 44% of Britons believe Keir Starmer would make the most capable Prime Minister. 31% chose Mr Johnson. That feels pretty significant to me. It never happened while I was an MP under Ed Miliband or Jeremy Corbyn. Is it significant?
Well, it's one indication of where we're at. The truth is, if you look more deeply at the leadership numbers, what is perfectly clear is that public confidence and evaluations of Boris Johnson have plummeted pretty seriously in the wake of Partygate. The row about Owen Paterson, which of course has triggered this by-election, that did the Prime Minister some damage. But so far as his personal ratings are concerned, Partygate's done him serious damage. Frankly, because at the end of the day, the polls suggest that most voters, including many a Conservative voter, just do not believe, A, that there wasn't a party, and B, that the rules were not broken. So therefore, they are now questioning the Prime Minister's veracity and probity. On the other hand, however, when people are asked separately, do you approve of or disapprove, of course, of Keir Starmer's performance as Labour leader, that's not changed very much in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So I think the truth is that the fact that Sir Keir Starmer is now ahead in some of the polls, at least on leadership ratings, is more of a commentary on the weakness of the Prime Minister than it is on Sir Keir. And indeed, some of the polls that ask who would make the best Prime Minister suggest that most voters think that neither of them would make the best Prime Minister. So I think this, to be honest, just looking at how Sir Keir has been comporting himself in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I think I would begin to say that Sir Keir has begun to become a politician and has become a little bit less of the lawyer. He is now seemingly to come up with some rather broader lines of attack on the Prime Minister, rather less concerned to try to fillet him forensically in Prime Minister's questions, more concerned to get those sound bites out. And I think many people felt that he gave an astute performance in his ministerial, response to the ministerial statement last night. So I can see signs of progress, but to be honest, it takes a long time to make a favourable impression on the public. He's had 2 years to do it, and he needs to make quite a lot more progress yet.
And finally, the problem with any national opinion poll is that it doesn't tell a story of what's happening in those seats that will count at the next election. What does the data say about where those lifelong Labour voters who switched to the Tories, where are they now?
The answer is that Labour's gained some ground amongst Leave voters since 2019. The calculation I've just done, Labour's votes up by about 8 points amongst Leave voters, but then equally it's up about 3 points amongst Remain voters as well. So modest progress in closing the gap. But of course, in order to recapture some of those red wall seats, Labour doesn't necessarily need all these voters to come back towards them. And what is clear, and it's been clear in the polls for quite some time, is that when the Tory vote goes down, as it has done at the moment, it's going down primarily amongst Leave voters, because those people who voted Remain in 2016 and still voted for the Conservatives in 2019, they look like very loyal voters who are very, very difficult to dislodge, even in current circumstances. The Leave voters, of course, in the Conservative coalition, a large proportion of them are people who switched to the Conservatives in either 2017 or 2019 and are therefore perhaps the more volatile element of the Conservative support. Now that's where the Conservative vote, above all, is down as compared with 2019. Some has gone to Labour, some has gone to Reform. But the truth is, probably Labour will be beginning to pick up some of those red wall seats at the moment, even though Labour's vote is still predominantly by around 2-1 across the country as a whole, a pro-Remain vote.
Professor John Curtice, we always learn so much by listening to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time.